I think when we're talking about intimacy, it is kind of taking that step back and looking at your priorities and making sure they're in alignment with the user manual that the Bible is, of that God has to be first. He has to be our first love. And if he is, then everything else will kind of fall naturally into place after that.
Every relationship, no matter if it's going to be a more distant relationship or not, you want to look for that firm foundation. You want to look for that firm grounding where it's stable.
Hi, everybody. This is Daniel Ross of Redemption Christian Church, the executive minister at Redemption, and we're doing a Redemption Podcast Extra today with our two counselors on staff. We're doing a companion podcast to the sermon series, Crazy Stupid Love, and we wanted to do a Redemption Podcast Extra with our two counselors on staff, as relationships are at the very root of so many issues that we all face. So just want to introduce our counselors. We have Paul Alvey and Annie Mason, who are both full-time counselors on Redemption staff. It's great to have you all with us today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. We're excited.
So we're just going to jump right into this. We're talking about relationships in this sermon series. Why are relationships so difficult?
Way to start off with an easy question. That's the question that's as old as time. Why are relationships so difficult? I think for me, it goes back to Genesis 3, the fall. As Christians, we believe that that is the foundation of why there's brokenness, why there's fractures at every level. And so when the fall happened, it broke our relationship with God, it broke our relationship with ourselves, it broke our relationship with others, and it broke our relationship with our earth. And so that kind of sets the stage of where we are today.
Absolutely, would agree. And I love that this series is started out in Genesis, and I agree with Annie wholeheartedly that it's our brokenness, it's our humanity, that we weren't even content in the garden, that we wanted something more and we wanted something different, and we were looking for something to make us better. And I think that was just amplified and has continued to be amplified through the years since the fall.
Yeah. Do you guys think that relationships, when you're doing your counseling, and again, I'm not asking you to divulge anything here, but when you're doing counseling, are relationships at the root of much of what you're dealing with?
Oh yeah, I would say that's one of the first things that I look for is where are the fractures? Where has that relationship with God or yourself or others happened? And usually it's all three. Usually those three mirror each other. Like they look similar in some way. You can kind of get a picture into your relationship with God by looking at your relationship with other people. It's going to look similar in some ways. And so I think that that's so foundational to the counseling process.
Absolutely. And I enjoy all forms of counseling, but I especially enjoy marital counseling and family counseling, and in every situation, including my own family. We have areas that we're fragmented in those relational things. Some of us just tend to click a little bit better than others, but it's always present, and it's always, and like what Annie said, we look for and I hate using this term, but it's a term that sometimes we just have to use. We look for the dysfunction in that. Well, we look for the strength-based things. What are they doing well in the relationship? How healthy is the relationship? What are the signs and symptoms that they're living into that are healthy within that the context of that relationship? But also at the same time looking for those dysfunctional areas that are the ones. Very few people come and see us because everything's going great. It's rare that somebody just bebops in and says, "Hey, I got an hour to kill. Right. You mind if we just sit here and talk?" I'm like, "No, it'd be great. Come on in." But usually there's some form of breakdown. There's some form of fragmentation or crisis before folks call us up and come spend time with us.
And we all deal with fragmentation and crisis. That's not a unique thing. Again, not betraying confidence, but you see staff members, you see people outside of the church as a whole. So there's fun and dysfunction to go around for everybody.
For everybody, absolutely,
Absolutely, yeah.
absolutely.
So relationships are kind of built on intimacy with one another. And like we were talking about before we started recording, the idea of the society we live in, where it's a performance-based society. You're always performing on social media. You're disconnected. You're kind of always on. Always putting on a show. So, what are some ways that we can increase actual Christ-centered intimacy with our spouses, with our future spouses, with other relationships in this kind of day and age that we live in?
Well, I think intimacy, by definition, comes through communication. It's how effectively are we communicating with each other, and what are the motivations behind that communication, and what are the areas, again, that we're functioning well in that? What are the healthy ways that we're interconnecting? So often we deal with codependency, which is not a healthy way of expressing intimacy. It's closeness at times, or it feels like closeness, but it's one of those dysfunctional areas that people often fall into that pull us away from a healthy interpersonal relationship. And once we kind of get in that trap or that snag of relating to each other in a codependent way, it just tends to feed itself and tends to drag us more into the unhealthy arena than the shared healthy interpersonal relationships that we're looking for. And it's often communication. And as we get into a microwave world of communication, i.e. text and beyond, it just becomes that much more difficult to connect intimately with whomever you're trying to communicate, especially, the statistics are staggering in a married family, how few minutes per day a married couple actually talks with each other. Some old statistics are on that, less than 3 minutes a day. Yeah, a husband and wife are actually communicating with each other. And when you factor in picking up the laundry or running by and picking up the Walmart order or whatever it is we're doing, those count as minutes. So when you factor those out, there's not much room, not much space left for that intimate, interpersonal, healthy communication. So it's such a critical issue. And often in counseling, I find the more we just prime that and start that and get that going, it starts changing things immediately, and we start moving closer to each other, and we move closer to a healthy relationship with each other. It's a great question, and it's fundamental, I think, in this series, Crazy Stupid Love, and it's intertwined in all three of those.
It's interesting that you say, that specifically in that marriage relationship, if you're constantly busy, you're constantly running to do this and do that. How can husbands and wives, when they have children especially, how can they fight for that intimacy so that when the kids, because this is where my wife and I are at the moment, our kids are 18 and 20 now, and we're moments away from being empty nesters in terms of the way time works, yes. And I know my dad always told me, you want to be able to look at your spouse from across the table and know who that person is after your kids leave home. How do you fight for that? How do you make that happen when it seems like the world is like, you got ball games, you've got travel ball, you've got AAU ball, you've got dance, you've got this and you got this and you got this and this and this and this, and all of a sudden you look up and you don't know that person across the table. So how do you fight for that in the midst of all that?
Absolutely.
Again, that's just an expansion of that question. How do we do this?
Yeah.
I think that there's obvious, like, just behavior modification, there's time management, there's all those things that I think are helpful and can be helpful in different seasons of life. But I always think of it almost in a broader sense of when you look at your relationships and you look at intimacy in those relationships, you want to think almost in terms of idols of the heart, because there's this concept of disordered loves that I think it was Augustine, I'd have to Google it to know for sure, but talked about loving something first that should be second or third, and how you can have really good intentions in your family, but you can kind of mess up, quote unquote, your family in a way if you love your kids more than you love God, or you love your career more than you love your spouse. That's a disordered loves. And so I think there is kind of a sense of, and that is somewhat of the process of counseling, at least from my perspective, of looking at what are we really loving first, and almost from a Christian perspective, what are we worshiping? And worship is not just Sunday morning. Worship is, what are you orienting your heart around? What do you daydream about? What do you think about? Where does the great source of your worries and your anxieties come from? And that can kind of give you some clues of, maybe I do worship my career. Maybe my career is my idol. Maybe that is something that I put first, and I put that far and above my spouse. Or kids can rise to the top of your priority list when your spouse can kind of get lost. And so I think when we're talking about intimacy, it is kind of taking that step back and looking at your priorities and making sure they're in alignment with the user manual that the Bible is, of that God has to be first. He has to be our first love. And if he is, then everything else will kind of fall naturally into place after that. And then once your kids are out of the house, you still have that relationship with your spouse because it was prioritized throughout those 0 to 18 years, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Great stuff, Annie. And so there's a great book. It's an old book now, but it's called Intimate Allies. And I forget who the author is on that, but it's just an outstanding book for bringing forth those subtle things within, especially a marital relationship, that are so critical. We become familiar, and familiarity can really be problematic within a marriage. And one of the ways that I challenge couples to become more intimate is to become infinitely curious about each other. It's amazing how we just get to a point and we think, I know everything about them. That's good. We're good. We're good. What else can what else can I possibly learn or know? And do I want to know or learn anything else? So we just get to that point where we just kind of plateau and we hang out there. But just like Annie said, one of the biggest dangers is just time moves by so fast. And, show me your calendar and show me your checkbook, and I'll show you where your priorities are every time. And it's never fails that we invest in those things that we value the most. And we have to be extremely intentional, especially within the context of a marriage, of making sure that we have that proper priorities, not the disordered priorities that she talked about. But it's so subtle and so easy to fall into those things, especially when we're talking about dealing with our children and devoting time and cutting up what little free time it seems that we have to invest and pour in. And we just hear that all day, every day, about that pouring into. But if we have our priorities right and we pour in to the marriage, we're also pouring into all the rest of the things, because the marriage has to become the umbrella. It has to be the roof that protects everything that you value underneath that. And the stronger you build that roof and that ability to shed those things that are going to come against you and your marriage and your family, the more we become intimate allies. And that has to be centered with that love of God in the center of it. And we just don't talk about this much at all anymore, but there's no space for a third person in a marriage. There just isn't. And we allow that all the time. And we allow it through social media. We allow it through casual relationships, and we have to guard that. And the only person in between that husband and that wife, even a counselor, doesn't come between. We always come alongside. We come along with. We never get between a husband and a wife. And that's so critical that we have them face each other and we have them start that conversation together, look at each other in the eye and start maybe even hold hands if it's safe at that point to do that, and to gravitate towards each other so that only space between them is occupied by God and God alone. And that's sacred space. And I really think if we can just start that conversation and really start living into that is that intimate space, especially within the confines and context of marriages, is sacred space.
So, not to camp out on that too long, but let's say a couple is listening to this and their kids are involved in 800,000 different things, and you talked about a third person in the space. Is it possible for those good things to become God things in our life, and become wedge issues for spouses?
Probably one of the easiest for us, because in our mind there's nothing wrong with that. But if we get those disordered, as Annie had said earlier, then once we get out of alignment, out of God's will in all of this, and I thought Daryl did a great job of starting that series off with who's the author of marriage and who's the author of family, it has to be ordered that way, or it gets out of alignment. It gets lopsided on one side or the other. And then if we don't become aware of that fairly quickly, we tend to start getting comfortable with that. And it's then over a period of time that starts to diminish the intimacy, not only between the married couple, but between one of the parents and their children. And it's so critical to keep that, to be mindful about setting appropriate boundaries. And if the husband and wife are setting those boundaries together, it's going to be way healthier than one parent or the other either being responsible for the nurturing and caregiving and caretaking of those children, or not being engaged or involved in that. So either one of those are real big dangers, but easily we can get that disordered and do it out of a misguided sense of priorities and love that has to flow through the marriage first.
Yeah, I think usually it comes from a good place. People are wanting to do good things. They want to put their kids first. They want to show love the best way that they can. And usually it's, you said earlier, Paul, like kind of gradual. It happens so easy, so quickly. We kind of slip into these patterns. And I think that's where, don't be afraid just to call a time out. If you and your spouse need to take a half day off work and, go on a date, call the babysitter. There are babysitters galore, and, just take some time out to really step back from your life and look at it and really soberly look at it. I think even biblically, we're called to do that, to be still and to assess things, to know, is this healthy? Is this what's best for our kids, that we are running in opposite directions? We never see each other. No, what's best for your kids is that your marriage is really strong and healthy, even if that means your kids maybe miss a sports thing here and there, or or maybe they pull back and they're not involved in 800 things. Maybe they're involved in 799, and that can be helpful sometimes, that the priority is not that your kid's involved in everything. The priority is that there's a healthy family.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I had a friend back in the day used to say that, in the Old Testament they worshipped Baal, and now we just changed one letter and now we worship the ball.
That's great.
I've seen that. I've seen that personally with lots of families. The over scheduling with the priority on the kids.
Yeah.
We learned fairly early on that our kids were not going to be WNBA superstars. I know that may be shocking, but I think that pressure to get the scholarship, to get to that next level and stuff has really, while it may be good for some kids, it's detrimental for a lot of families, I think. So let's, move away from married folks for a moment and thinking about those who are single, those who are dating, maybe divorced. How can the church come alongside? How can we be a benefit to people, especially when so much of church life seems to be dominated by the quote unquote family and marriage?
That's really a great question. And that's probably the most difficult in this series of questions for me. I once served with a church that had a separate part of the church campus that was called the Family Life Center.
Yeah.
And it got to be such an issue that they took family and just took it off and just started referring to it as the Life Center, which is perfectly okay. But for me, that Family Life Center meant the church family, and it also included our family. But I can also see how that'd be intimidating or putting off of somebody that was single. Recently, within the last year or so, I went on to a conference and stopped at a Cracker Barrel, and it was just me, and I was traveling, and I'd never had this really, or I hadn't been aware of this experience, that when the hostess came and got me, they took me to the furthest seat in the corner in the back, and it was kind of like dark, and it was just kind of cold, and I think I experienced what I hear often from people, especially widows, talk about that just being alone and being treated differently and treated separately. I think as a church we have to be extremely mindful for that. We have to be reaching out. We have to be including those folks, and we have to just start raising that awareness that we've got plenty of seats. We got plenty of room at the table at our church, and we need to be able to make sure that we are able to have those open conversations, and that we're reaching out, that we are building relationships, that we're building a sense of community, groups, and even it's intimidating, I think, especially for younger high school age or maybe even early college age, to find a group when the nearest group age-wise to them are the young married families, and a lot of the conversations are so different and all that type of stuff. But I think it begins with awareness, and we start having that conversation, and we do what Annie just said earlier about our marriages. We need to periodically just step back and really assess what are we doing and how are we focusing, because again, it's so easy to slip into that programming or so-called programming that we forget, and we just get focused on that so deeply, and we get targeting a specific group, not because we're trying to exclude other groups. It's just that seems and tends to be the group that responds the most, and we get the biggest return for inviting those folks in. But Daniel, when we look across this world, loneliness, it just is such a tremendous issue. And it is. And unfortunately, it's loneliness within the context of families and marriages, and especially within the context of just our local community. There are so many people. We get folks often that just schedule an appointment to come in and talk.
Wow.
And often.
Just need somebody to talk to.
They just need somebody to talk to. And that's not unusual at all. And it's kind of interesting to watch how that processes out, but you can pick up on that pretty early when you start looking at what are the issues, what are the presenting issues, and they're not real sure. They just don't feel whole, or they don't feel complete, and they don't feel loved. And they'll say that often. And then you just start that conversation, start building that therapeutic relationship or that unconditional regard for that person, and you can just see them start to blossom with that time. But those are the times that we also got to kind of manage that, because we don't want them to become codependent in that relationship. But we want to start modeling, which is the other thing I would say about the church, is model marriages, model family, and come alongside and invite those people into your I served at church one time, and at the end of that time went to serve another church. And one of the first things that I was asked was, did the church you come from, did you ever go have lunch, dinner with the church members? And I just thought that was such an odd question. And the question to me was absolutely, almost every Sunday we would have an invite to go with somebody out to eat or go to their house, and they would already have it prepared, or would prepare it when we came. And it was an interesting dynamic because they said, I don't think that's going to happen a lot here. But it did, it turned out. But that part of community, when people are willing to open up their house, open up their family, and be vulnerable and be that, initiate that. Start the invite, figure out, take a chance, take a risk, a safe chance and a safe risk. But start building that relationship. Look for those opportunities, invite those people in. It's easy to spot somebody that's off to the side, that's not engaged or doesn't maybe feel welcome. Look for those opportunities.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is so beautiful about the church, what the church can offer, is this idea of a spiritual family. Because in talking about relationships, there is so much brokenness. I mean, there are relationships within either your immediate or extended family that sometimes can't be repaired or is going to take a really long time to repair. And so if you are someone who doesn't have a good relationship with your biological mother, let's say, you can find a spiritual mother within the church. You can find a spiritual father, and you can be that as well. And, one of my favorite things in the church, honestly, it makes me super emotional when I see it, is looking out and seeing the multi-generation, seeing babies, seeing elderly people, seeing families, seeing single people, seeing all the different generations, because I think that's what the body of Christ at its best really should be. And I think every stage of life should be celebrated and embraced. And I think sometimes single people can kind of be made to feel like they're second class, because it's never, I think, explicitly said, of course, but it can be implied with a lot of programs made for families, and kind of maybe sermons are geared more towards families. But we worship a God who was single, right? Jesus died unmarried. And Corinthians talks about it's better to be single because you can have undivided devotion to our God. And so, I think the church should be at its best. It should be a place that can have this celebration and resources for every stage of life, and then that spiritual family to fill in where maybe you can't have the family that in a perfect world would be so beautiful to have, but there's brokenness. And while you are kind of working through that brokenness, you can have that spiritual father or mentor or discipler, and you can also be that to other people. And so I think the church really has potential to step up in that way.
So how do we cultivate that as a church in a world, in a society where you can't speak into my life? Rugged individualism, right? That's what the quote-unquote American society is built on, rugged individualism. So how do you open yourself up, and how do you try to become a spiritual father or spiritual mother or spiritual sibling in that kind of environment? How do we open ourselves up? Like, I'm speaking as an introvert when, I've got all the friends I need. I don't have any room in my life for any more friends. That kind of that Seinfeldian approach to life. How do we begin to open ourselves up to those kinds of things?
Well, I think one thing is taking the pressure off of yourself in terms of it doesn't have to be this majorly huge shift. I mean, it could mean, you taking, a younger man out for coffee once a month, and that counts as, maybe that younger man doesn't have a father figure, and you all of a sudden can be that. And that coffee to him is huge, is a big deal. I know throughout my life, I came from a really healthy family, but I had so many mentors in the church, and they probably from their perspective, they didn't give me tons of time, but the impact was incredible, right? Yeah. And so I think, It's not like you have to sell everything you have and now disciple everyone you see. What can you do in your day-to-day life that's manageable, but also maybe pushes, your own limitations a little bit? Because I think we're very individualistic in our culture, but we all kind of have some self-centeredness, me first in that, of just, I want to do what I want to do. And so how can we kind of push past that a little bit and see with different eyes, who can we love and who can we serve and who can we do that in a way that's realistic? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and kept another book too that's really good on that. It's called Bridges, Not Walls, and it talks about just the pathway of building all kinds of different relationships, and we always want to be mindful of appropriate boundaries and those type of things. Boundaries within a relationship are healthy. Good fences make good neighbors. Good boundaries make good relationships. And Daniel, much like you, that inner circle, that close, intimate circle, I can count them on one hand,
right.
And that's a good, healthy number. But we also, Brene Brown talks about vulnerability and reaching outside of our own comfort zone, and I love the way that she puts all that and the way that she does, because there is a risk for those of us that are pretty private, especially introverted type of people. There's always that risk of rejection, that risk of ridicule, that risk of not being enough, not being worthy, and
at risk of exposing yourself, being more vulnerable than it being weaponized against you, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. It is, and it's all that stuff's real, and I think we start doing that, and again, we model that. There's some people that just naturally do that better than other people, and feels more natural, normal. In our staff meeting today, talking with one of our staff members, and just the way they're reaching out and doing ministry. It is a ministry, and we need to look at that, I think, from a church, not that we're ministering to somebody that needs to be ministered to, but it's a ministry through the giftedness that we have, and we find those people that do that naturally and put them in positions where they can identify and interact and invite in. People respond so well to invitation. And it has to feel safe. It has to be, whatever their brokenness is, and they can spot other people's brokenness, and then often it doesn't feel safe. But if we can overcome that and start doing that, invite somebody over that's especially a single person or something, within a safe confines of doing that. To participate in an event with your family, and we're often afraid that they're going to feel excluded by that. But boy, I'll tell you, somebody that's craving family, to be invited into a healthy relationship within the confines of a healthy family could build a lifetime bridge, could build a lifetime relationship that. And possibly change the trajectory of that person's life for not just them, but the next generation to come as well. So I think, we look for those opportunities. Men's Advance, the Alive conference that went on, what a great opportunity for all groups, for everyone to come and participate in that. And we have to be intentional about inviting those folks that maybe don't have that close, personal, intimate relationship with other people.
So just a good jumping off point to this last topic that we're looking at in this series is about things being built to last. We live in a difficult age. We live in a very temporary, fleeting age, I guess you would say. So how can we live as believers in such a way that our relationships, our marriages last, stand the test of time? I think that, there's debate about the statistics, but Christian marriages don't look that much different than quote unquote the world's marriages in terms of divorce statistics and that kind of thing. So what are some things that we can do? What are things that we can build into our lives to make those relationships last? Not just marriages, but friendships and everything else too.
I would say a couple of things. I mean, I think to me, the first thing that comes to my mind is forgiveness, because there is such brokenness in relationships. And so I think that we need to be great forgivers. But I think to do that, you also need to just always remember in your heart how much you've been forgiven, to just keep at the forefront that there's brokenness in your heart as much as you see it maybe in your spouse or your friend. And so accepting that grace of God and letting that overflow to other people, I think that's a huge mark of a believer that will set you apart immediately if you can be a great forgiver. And I think another thing is boundaries. It's really healthy and appropriate to have good boundaries. And I think that that's something that unfortunately, in this world we need. I think back to Genesis 3, that's something that at the fall created the need for. And in a perfect world, we wouldn't need them, but we do need them, and that they're healthy. God actually has boundaries with us. He says, I'm okay with this and not that. And if you act this way, it's not okay. And, it's healthy for there to be boundaries in a relationship. And then I think the last thing is from my perspective, is to just continue to grow intimacy in all your relationships. Especially, of course, if we're talking about marriage, but in every relationship, to just grow intimacy. And I always love the analogy of the bottom of the well. So in relationships, a lot of times, like, one person will be feeling down or feeling something really heavy, and they're at the bottom of the well. And somebody else will be feeling different, and they'll be at the top of the well. And the person at the top of the well may mean well, and they may, yell from the very top, it's okay, everything's going to be fine. Here's a rope, let's get out of this well together. We'll be fine. That's really not what the person at the bottom of the well needs. They need you to jump in the well with them and sit with them in the darkness. And that is excruciatingly hard for us as humans, because we don't want to face our own brokenness, and we certainly don't want to face anybody else's. But I think being able to cultivate that skill of just sitting at the bottom of the well, instead of offering someone the way out or offering them the cheery words, but just being able to sit with them and say, I'm with you.
Man, that's
really good.
That is some deep stuff. That's Job's friends,
Right.
Job's friends that sit with him, and some of them say, well, what did you do? Obviously, you did something wrong, and then some of them just sit there with him. And, that's such a tough thing to do. And I know for my own personal life, our MO in my family was to fix it, to figure out how to solve this puzzle, how to, make 1 and 1 equal 2. And sometimes we just have to sit with them at the bottom. That's a great analogy.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And Job's friends started out so well. They just sit with him, and nobody said a word for the longest time. And there's so much to be said about that, and then they tried to fix him. Then they tried to fix the situation. But, so much to be said. So in relationships, I think we can become better at relationships no matter who we are, no matter where we're at in our station of life. We just have to have that desire in our heart. And there's foundational things that we can do in every relationship that are either going to cause us to build a firm, and it, again, biblical foundation for that is build your house on the rock. Don't do it on the shifting sand. So build that relationship, every relationship, no matter if it's going to be a more distant relationship or not. You want to look for that firm foundation. You want to look for that firm grounding where it's stable, and stability. If it feels unstable, look at it and just start figuring out why, and that's what we love about counseling, is whenever that we've rushed into something probably and haven't taken a long time to assess it or analyze it or do the hard work. Nobody wants, when you're building a house, nobody wants to, oh gosh, I'm going to spend 3 months on the foundation, They want to see that house being built. They want to see the furniture being moved in. And that's the way we are across the board. And the truth of it is, if you're going to spend time and money, make sure you're doing it in the foundation first, because you can always change the other stuff if you've taken time to build the foundation correctly. And that's so critical. And just, there are so many great books. And Annie, I know, is a reader, and I know you're a huge reader. And find the resources, and there are good authors. And quite honestly, without, I'm going to say focus on the family, but focus on the family is focused on people, on relationships, and they do one of the best jobs of vetting their authors and their guests out of anybody that I've ever seen. And a lot of the books that I buy for resources in counseling is based on that author. They'll speak to my heart about, but they talk about singleness and divorce and death within a relationship and all those. And just every day it's just a new topic and well vetted, high quality interview process. But go find somebody that that does relationships well, and ask them, what is it that you're doing well, and be honest about it with yourself, and if you need a little bit of help, don't wait till I'm using another metaphor, don't wait till the trains come off the track. If it starts wobbling back and forth, or if just doesn't feel safe or foundationally grounded, that's the best time. But we often don't get motivated till we get...
The train is off the tracks.
So we're in crisis or near crisis, and that's fine. That's great. That's what we're here for as well. But we love that. We love it when folks come in and we can just give them a few resources, and we love it when folks are hungry to get. And unhealthiness attracts health. Healthiness attracts healthiness. So if we can just get one aspect of that system to start moving towards health, we can typically move that whole system into a healthy pattern, or at least reverse or stop the unhealthy aspects that were taking place in that.
So that's where the church can come in together, again, as like you were mentioning, the mentorships. If you desire a good marriage, a long-lasting marriage, find people that have good marriages and long-lasting marriages, and talk to them. And if you are single and you want to know how to do that, see somebody that is single and has a great walk with Christ, and ask them.
Absolutely.
That's where like our youth coaches and that kind of thing are so valuable to our students and our kids. And it's a great opportunity to be able to pour into those lives without using too many churchy words.
And I think what we're doing with Rooted, if you take Rooted, those principles apply wherever you're at in your walk of life. And I think developing sermon series that start bringing up that conversation. My family, more so than any time in the history of my family, has been engaged. They're asking questions, and did you hear, or did you know, or what did you think about when he said that? And those spark that conversation. And then the second you start the conversation, you're communicating, especially if you can do that out of love, and you're doing that towards each other instead of away from each other, it's just going to start building the intimacy, start building those fundamental things that you're wanting. So, I'm really proud to be part of this. I can only speak for myself, but incredibly blessed to get to be called into this vocation and into the counseling ministry. And I think Annie's exactly the same way.
Absolutely. Such an honor.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we wanted to do with this podcast is one of our ministers in one of the ministry staff meetings we had said we need to do a better job at quote unquote normalizing counseling. So really appreciate Paul, you and Annie coming here today to talk about this for the people that are going to listen to this. And how can, if somebody is in need and does need someone to walk alongside of them, how can they find out more about counseling here at Redemption?
Well, we get a lot of referrals from staff where they've talked to someone and didn't know we either were here yet or didn't know how to reach out and contact us. And I think, we're always looking for the opportunity to build partnerships throughout the community. We definitely want to get more involved in the life of Redemption and just get so we know places and faces and we are able to attend events and those type of things. But Kelly Reckelhoff is a wonderful resource for reaching out. She typically does a lot of our initial scheduling. She does a phenomenal job with that. Any one of the ministry staff absolutely will more than willingly connect us up, and it happens all the time. So, and if you see us, just snag us and say, hey, what would it look like for me to schedule a time to come in and see you guys or something? So we're open, we're available, we're here for the people. We love what we do. We love being busy. We love being able to come alongside families and folks that are seeking out some kind of way of addressing whatever it is, whatever the issues are in their lives. So,
and we have a multitude of avenues to do that in person. And Annie, you do a lot of, do you like to call it virtual counseling? What's the terminology we like to use?
I think it's like teletherapy, but virtual is probably the better word, more commonly used. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's multiple avenues for us to utilize when it comes to counseling. So we encourage anybody to reach out for any number of reasons, any number of needs. So Annie and Paul, I appreciate you guys being here today on the podcast, and for an initial run, I don't think it went too bad.
That was great. I loved it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It was fun.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Now.
Thanks.